Okay, this is a video of the flashcards. I'm going to quickly go over the structures for the flashcards that we missed this week. So starting with the cell body, talking about the nucleus and the nucleolus. So the cell body is this whole enlarged structure here. So both of these neurons, this is the cell body, the enlarged region, this whole area, cell body. The nucleus is this oval, this round structure here. This is the nucleus. And this is the nucleus. And then inside the nucleus, this one has one nucleolus, that's orange there. This one has two nucleoli, so more than one nucleolus is nucleoli, so that would be the nucleolus. Then looking at the dendrites, axon terminal, the dendrites are these extensions of the cell body. So these are the receiving parts of the neuron. These extensions here are the dendrites, so they're shown white here. These are actually axon terminals of other neurons, so just ignore the brown ones. Only worry about the white. So these are the dendrites on this neuron, the white little extensions there. And then on this neuron, it's the green extensions. So those are the dendrites. And then the axon is in the middle, so it's orange here. This is the axon in this example. And in this neuron, it's gray. So that's the axon here in this example. And then the axon terminals are the extensions at the end of the axon, so they'd be down here. And we don't really have a good model. This model, I think, kind of fell apart and broke, so I think this is the only one we really have. So if you're going to look at axon terminals, it's probably going to be in a diagram. So Schwann cell and myelin sheath. So a Schwann cell is what makes myelin. So this is the nucleus of the Schwann cell, this dark here structure. This is the Schwann cell. And then the myelin sheath is all the white. So all the white is the myelin sheath, the white layered structures, or layered material, I guess. And then the node of Ranvier is the indented region here. So this is a node of Ranvier, this is a node of Ranvier. So just where it indents. Same here in this one, the node of Ranvier is where this kind of orange circle is here, but it's the indented region. And the axon is in gray here, and this would be the Schwann cell that creates the myelin. So in this model, the myelin is yellow. Then if we look at nervous tissue, what you have to know about nervous tissue is just that it's, nervous tissue, and this is a neuron or nerve cell. So this is a neuron. The smaller nuclei are not neurons. That's those glial cells like astrocytes and things. But this is the neuron. It says axon here. You don't have to know axon in nervous tissue, so you can just cross that off. The whole slide is nervous tissue, and the cell that you have to know in this is just the neuron. So cross off axon. You don't need to know that. This is a slide of a nerve. So the organ is a nerve. This whole thing is a nerve. So the whole thing, organ, is a nerve. Shh, sorry, I have my dog here. One of my dogs has kennel cough, so she's on the other side of the door, and her dog friend, my other dog, is upset that our other dog can't come in. But I don't want you guys to have to listen to kennel cough while I'm trying to record my video. My dog went to a dog place last week that had a lot of other dogs, and she picked up kennel cough there, so not fun. So anyway, so this is a nerve, and then these little circles are axons of other neurons. So you can see they have a dark center and the white outer edge. So the dark center is the axon, and the white around it is a myelin. So each one of these little circles is an axon, and this you do need to know. This is really a blurry picture. I wish this turned out a little better. I have a better picture on Blackboard in the PowerPoints, but regardless, just pick a circle here. The white with the dark center is an axon. That's all you have to know. So know this whole slide is a nerve, and the little circular structures are axons. Then we talk about the brain. So cerebral hemisphere, each half is a cerebral hemisphere. And the longitudinal fissure is what runs right down the middle. This long structure here is a longitudinal fissure. Looking at the diencephalon is purple. It's made up of the thalamus and the hypothalamus. So this is the diencephalon. And then the brainstem is what's shown in green. And the brainstem is made up of the midbrain, the pons, and the medulla oblongata. So that is the brainstem. So be sure, if I'm going too fast, that you hit pause and give yourself time to fill out these flashcards. Like I said in class last week, I'm going to go through these quickly, assuming that you're going to hit the pause button so you can do this at your own pace. The cerebellum is the little brain that comes off of the brain stem, so that's here. It has that cauliflower appearance when we cut it in half, like a cross section. And then the spinal cord is that region of the brainstem that goes beyond the cerebellum. So it's no longer brainstem, it's just spinal cord here at the bottom. So just this bottom portion that's colored beige. So use the cerebellum kind of as your guiding line, that when you get beyond the cerebellum, it's no longer brainstem, but it's spinal cord. And then the meninges, the dura mater, find the skull bone, and that's where the meninges start, is underneath the skull bone. So this is spongy bone of our skull. So these two thicker layers are dura mater. The thin layer here is arachnoid mater. Well, this one is only pia mater. So dura mater are the thick top layers, two thick top layers underneath the bone. So that's dura mater, and then pia mater is tightly adhered to the brain itself. So it's this thin beige layer. So the thin beige layer is pia mater. Arachnoid mater is the white, spidery, kind of fibrous little extensions coming off of it. This is the arachnoid mater, and the space underneath the arachnoid mater is called the subarachnoid space. So you have arachnoid mater, subarachnoid space below it. Then we have the nerves of the brain. So we have the olfactory bulb here on the end, the swelling, and this is the olfactory tract. Olfactory bulb, olfactory tract. And then the next one, optic nerve, has been cut. So this is the optic nerve. The top of the X is the optic nerve. And then the middle of the X is the optic chiasma, right here in the middle. And then the bottom is the optic tract. So optic tract. And then we look at the fissures. The lateral fissure is on the side of the brain. It outlines the temporal lobe. So this is the lateral fissure here at the top of the temporal lobe. And then the central sulcus, and what goes over the top, kind of like a crown, right here is the central sulcus. It divides the frontal lobe from the parietal lobe. So central sulcus. Precentral gyrus is that rise in brain tissue in front of the central sulcus. So this is the precentral gyrus here, and the postcentral gyrus is here. Then we have the frontal lobe is pink. The parietal lobe is this blue color, divided by the central sulcus. And then we have the temporal lobe on the side of the brain, and the occipital lobe in the back, just above the cerebellum. So that region there is the occipital lobe, just like the bones of the skull. The corpus callosum is this flattened C-shaped structure, so this whole thing you can shade in. Corpus callosum looks like a flattened C. And the thalamus is the purple round structure. It's kind of like the peach pit of the brain. It's smack in the middle. It's a rounded structure, and there's two lobes to it. Remember, this makes up the diencephalon, but this is the thalamus here, this rounded structure. And then the hypothalamus is like the nose of our little seahorse with the Elvis hairdo. So this is the eye, or the head of the seahorse. So the nose or mouth of the seahorse, this is the hypothalamus. This whole purple region here is hypothalamus. And then the pituitary gland hangs off of it down here. So this is the pituitary gland. And in your models in lab, it looked like a peanut. And in the sheep brain, it was buried in dura mater, so we had to just tear it off. We never were able to look at it on the sheep brain. But on the models, a couple of the human brain models did have a pituitary gland. Again, it looked like a peanut. It's very distinct. You can definitely recognize it as the pituitary gland. And then the pineal gland is in the back of the thalamus, kind of like a ponytail coming off of the thalamus. This is the pineal gland back here. So the pituitary gland at the base of the hypothalamus, and the pineal gland here behind the thalamus. All right, so the midbrain is, if you find the pons, which is the big swelling here, the midbrain is that region above it. And what divides the midbrain into its two parts is this cerebral aqueduct. So let's look at this first. So the whole thing here, this whole region that I'm encircling here, this is all midbrain. So all of that above the pons below the thalamus is all midbrain. And then this aqueduct here divides the two parts of the midbrain. So this in front is the cerebral peduncles. So this portion here on this side of the cerebral aqueduct, this is the cerebral peduncles. And on this side, this is the corpora quadrigemina. So it's on that side. And all together this makes up the midbrain. So the pons is the swelling. It's kind of the belly of our seahorse. This is the pons. And then the medulla oblongata is below that. It's oblong, kind of triangular in shape, but it continues all the way down. You could even continue down further, but it's just safe to keep it in this wider region here. This is the medulla oblongata, this region here. It could even go to the end because the cerebellum kind of is the end line of the medulla. But just so you're not calling it the pons. The pons is clearly this large swollen area, and then you have the medulla. So then we have the choroid plexus, which is this little mass of tissue here that we see in the third ventricle around the thalamus here, that mass of that reddish tissue there, that's the choroid plexus. And then the lateral ventricle is this space underneath the corpus callosum. So there's a large space underneath the corpus callosum. It's right here. This whole space here is the lateral ventricle. Each side of the brain has one. So the third ventricle is around the thalamus. So it's this space here. If I take my probe and put it above the thalamus, I can dig down deep into there. That's the third ventricle around the thalamus. This is the thalamus, so this is the third ventricle, this space here in between. Cerebral aqueduct, like I said, divides the midbrain, so it flows from the third ventricle down through the midbrain into the fourth ventricle, which is here. So we have third ventricle here, cerebral aqueduct dividing the corpora quadrigemina from the cerebral peduncle, so the cerebral aqueduct tucking into the fourth ventricle on the base of the cerebellum. Then in this cross-section view, these are the frontal sections that you have to look at. Like I said, if we cut the brain like a meatloaf, we'll see the basal nuclei are out here. They're triangular or pie-shaped structures kind of off on the edge, because right here is the thalamus. This structure here is the thalamus, and off on the edges, these pie-shaped structures are called the basal nuclei. So we have the thalamus with the third ventricle, and let's just stick with what I'm showing here. So the basal nuclei are this pie-shaped structure, a little darker orange. These are the basal nuclei here and here. And then the longitudinal fissure is this deep groove right here in the middle of the brain, because this is a cut of the brain. There's a frontal section when we cut the brain kind of like a meatloaf. This is what it would look like. So that's the longitudinal fissure. Then the third ventricle, thalamus, and lateral fissure. So these would be lateral ventricles, but the third ventricle would be here. So this is the third ventricle. Over here, those are another example of basal nuclei, but let's stick to the flashcard. So we have the third ventricle. The thalamus is all around the third ventricle, so all of this here is thalamus. Around this little opening, all this dark brown tissue is the thalamus. And then the lateral fissure is on the side here. So this kind of deep groove here on this side, and on this side is the lateral fissure. Then we have the lateral ventricles. Those are very large. They're going to be over here. We saw those in a couple of these. This is a lateral ventricle. It's a little small there. These are nice and big of the lateral ventricles. So look for those large spaces here, here, and here. And then the fourth ventricle is in the cerebellum. So this is the cerebellum. So there's the fourth ventricle right there, that space in the cerebellum. So this slice was taken toward the back of the brain. So the cerebellum is this whole thing, and the space in there is the fourth ventricle, and the lateral ventricles here, the larger space. So in the sheep brain, the cerebral hemispheres are here and here. The longitudinal fissure is right down the middle, and the cerebellum is this mass of brain near the bottom, and the spinal cord beyond that. And then the corpus callosum is this white structure here. It's kind of in a C-shaped structure. This is corpus callosum. And the lateral ventricle is that space underneath the corpus callosum. You can see it's peeking out there. It's a hole there. And then the thalamus is this perfectly rounded structure right here. Thalamus. The third ventricle is that space just above the thalamus, and we'd see a little bit of choroid plexus in there too. I can see it right here. But this space above the thalamus is the third ventricle. So we have the corpus callosum in white, lateral ventricle, third ventricle, this dark space here. And the thalamus was the rounded structure here. All right, then we have the midbrain. So if we find the thalamus, the midbrain is just below it. So here's the pons, the swelling of the pons. So the midbrain is here, and here's that cerebral aqueduct. So the midbrain, we have the corporal quadrigemina on this side of the cerebral aqueduct, and we have the cerebral peduncles on this side of the cerebral aqueduct. Again, this is the cerebral aqueduct right here, this line. That's what divides the two. So this whole region here is the midbrain. We have the corporal quadrigemina and the cerebral peduncles with the cerebral aqueduct dividing the two. And then that leads to the fourth ventricle, which is tucked into the cerebellum here. So this is the fourth ventricle here. So choroid plexus, like I said, is this brown tissue that we can kind of poke out of the third ventricle. It's made up of ependymal cells and blood vessels, so it's just a brown mass of tissue. The pons, this is the top of the brainstem here, because this is the midbrain, so below that is all brainstem. I can see this pons sticks out a little bit right here, so I know this is the pons. This whole region is the pons. And then the medulla oblongata is below that, so this whole region kind of in front of the most of the cerebellum here is medulla oblongata. And then spinal cord beyond that. So this region here and beyond is spinal cord. So that's spinal cord, medulla oblongata from here to here, and then pons from here to here, and choroid plexus, that little mass of tissue in the third ventricle. So cerebral peduncles, if we turn the brain over, these are the optic nerves, this is the medulla oblongata, this is the pons. So these large V-shaped structures, this is part of the midbrain, these are the cerebral peduncles. So this large mass of tissue here and here are the cerebral peduncles. This kind of makes a V shape if I outline it. So here's the bottom, then I go up and down and up and down. This whole region here are the cerebral peduncles. The pons is number 14, this swollen area. And the medulla oblongata is all of this oblong region here. This is the medulla oblongata. The optic nerve, again, look for that X-shaped structure that's been cut really short here. So the top, what number 7 is pointing to, this is the optic nerve on this side. Here's the optic nerve on this side. Then we have the optic chiasma. Then we have the optic tract below here and the optic tract below here. So optic nerve on top, optic tract below, optic chiasma in the middle. Olfactory bulb is very large in the sheep brain, so the swollen ends here are the olfactory bulbs. Olfactory bulbs. And then olfactory tract comes down here in this direction. So this is all olfactory tract. And on this side is here, olfactory tract. This region. Just color that in. If we separate the cerebrum from the cerebellum, we get that baby's butt view, which is the corpora quadrigemina. There's 4 swellings. These are the larger ones. It looks like the baby butt, and then below it are the 2 smaller swellings. So 4 swellings, quad, that's where the word corpora quadrigemina comes from, those 4 swellings. So that's that. So cerebrum is here, cerebellum is here, and the corpora quadrigemina is between them. So the frontal pictures. This is already labeled for you, so you have the numbers. Longitudinal fissure, lateral sulcus. So these flashcards are done for you, so those are all complete. And the next one is for next week, so that completes the lecture video or the lab video on the flashcards for nervous system on the brain. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you next week.